Hi everyone. There was a question on Matthew Smith's channel where he asked us, quite simply, are you glad that the Beatles broke up when they did? And rather than post comments there, being that I have a Beatles related channel, I thought I'd make my own video response. And it may surprise some people, I don't know, or maybe not, depending if you know me pretty well by now. I don't really know if I would use the word glad, but I would say that it's okay with me. I'm really okay with it, and I think it was a good move at the right time. The right move at the right time. Now, I can say that because, in a way, I'm coming from the generation after the Beatles, really. I mean, even though I was aware of the Beatles when I was a little kid and watched the cartoons and everything, I really don't think, in memory here, that I remember them breaking up or anything. I was about 8 years old when they broke up. Didn't really get to be a real hardcore fan until I was about 14. So I really grew up with the Beatles in the 70s. So I was used to their solo music. And I guess I'm approaching it from a different angle. If I had been someone who lived the Beatles experience first generation, you know, I was a teenager throughout the 60s, it probably would have been a bitter pill to swallow. You know, rats. You know, the Beatles aren't together anymore. But I've never been one of those Beatle fans that feels that, oh, I wish the Beatles went on forever. Wouldn't it have been great if they'd gone on forever? Wouldn't it be great if they were still around like the Stones are, the Rolling Stones today? Believe me, I like the Rolling Stones, and eventually I'm going to make a video showing all my Rolling Stones albums. I like the Rolling Stones too, but I'm glad what happened to the Stones is not what happened to the Beatles. The Beatles were having difficulties with each other, so many things. George Harrison wasn't able to get enough time on each album. He had so many good songs, which is why his first real studio solo album, All Things Must Pass, is so brilliant. It's got so many gems on it that just couldn't fit on all the Beatles albums. There were so many reasons they had to split up when they did, and because they did, I think that also helped make it kind of magical. And actually a mystique. The Beatles went out on top. The Beatles never really had anything where they really flopped badly, except for arguably the Magical Mystery Tour television film that they made in 1967. That's the one thing in their career where they kind of got panned by the critics. You know, it's not a good movie, but it's not really a movie in the proper sense anyway. It's a bizarre psychedelic television special, and I think it holds up these days as an interesting time capsule piece when you watch it. It's not good, but it works as one of the first music album videos, which weren't around then. You know, later on they made those kind of things and released them, you know, in the late 70s, maybe 70s, 80s. Magical Mystery Tour, the television project, is basically a wild and zany psychedelic trip with a lot of music videos in it, if you want to look at it that way. So I'm cool with it, but the point I'm trying to make is that they really didn't make any big blunders or mistakes. They didn't make any real blunders to speak of commercially, musically, in their careers. So they went out on top, and that's why the Beatles, 50-something years later, are still revered the way they are, and they appeal to new generations. And there's new kids that are always getting interested in them. And we can see even here on YouTube, lots of videos by young people that were born maybe, you know, 30, 40 years after they split up. So, no, it never bothered me that the Beatles disbanded. Now, the question often is, would you have liked them to get together at some point? That also never bothered me. I suppose, had they gotten together maybe for like one old-time sake kind of concert or television event or something, it would have been nice. But then, of course, you always have the chance of them screwing it up, you know, and that never happened. They went on top. They didn't get any lemons. I think that if the Beatles had gone on and made records in 1971, 70, 71, 72 and on, eventually you're going to have to hit a stinker eventually. You're eventually going to have something that's really terrible and a really black mark on your musical songbook. And that really just didn't happen. And they're unique in that. That's not to say that there aren't songs in there that you can't pick on. I mean, stuff like Revolution 9, Wild Honey Pie, but these are all experimental nonsense things, especially some of the songs like Why Don't We Do It in the Road and Wild Honey Pie. They're just little segues between the albums. The songs, they're not even really songs in the true sense of the word, but you know where I'm going with that. When the Beatles broke up, I like the fact that they went their separate ways and you can have 4 avenues. I mean, I find these days, as much as I'm into the Beatles, I love the solo careers. If I'm going to reach for a Beatles album or Beatles-related album, I usually go for a solo album. Because first you have them as a group, then you have 4 different directions splitting off in different ways with all different things to enjoy, different paths to take. So you have it the best of 5 different worlds, so to speak. So I'm cool with that. I have no problem. I remember I was in driver's education class when I was 17 years old, and I was in high school. It was September of 1979, and there was a big thing where a newspaper reported that the Beatles are back together. They're getting back for the boat people. They're reuniting. And I was behind the wheel, and the car radio was on, and the rest of the class was in the back seat, you know, the 2 other guys or whatever, and you had the driving instructor, and I almost, when I was in the driver's ed car, I stopped short. I was like, what? The Beatles are back together? Never happened. It was exciting. Maybe it would have been exciting, but you know, you might say, well, what kind of faith do you have in the Beatles if you think they would have bombed? I just think it's the law of averages. Not that I didn't have faith in them if they came back, but if they came back while making records, the law of averages, inevitably, they'd have to start running into a really rough patch. Can you imagine the Beatles getting into the disco era, and Beatles getting into punk or whatever else was coming around, and so on? I mean, I like disco, at least now. At the time, maybe not. But Beatles with disco, I don't know. There was a book that was out called Paperback Writer. It was a fictional story, and I think the name of the author is Mark Shipper. That's off the top of my head. Maybe I got the name wrong. But there was a book that kind of had a fictional story when John was still alive. This was like the late 70s. And it was like, what would happen if the Beatles got back together, just like everybody wanted them to, and they bombed? Just imagine what would happen. It's kind of a comical book. Some of the terrible songs they put out, and you know, there was one song called "The Ballad of Gilligan's Island" with really horrendous lyrics. I remember there was a John Lennon track called "Almost Cut My Hair," which was supposed to be really funny. And it was the idea like, hey, you know, leave well enough alone. Look what could happen if the Beatles reunited. And that's how I feel about it. You know, it's just a matter of the law of averages. There's no way if the Beatles had continued making another 10 or 20 albums, whatever it was, that they're all going to be as good as their best work from the 60s. And that brings us to the Rolling Stones. This is not a Beatles versus Stones thing. As I say, I like the Stones. I can appreciate both types of bands. I'm not one of these people that think you have to like either the Beatles or either the Stones. I like them both. Beatles more, but I still appreciate the Stones from the grittiness that they put across. That's different from the Beatles a lot of times. But the Stones, they don't have such a consistently flawless career because they went past the expiration date, in my opinion. And that's all I can say about that. So, am I glad the Beatles broke up when they did? Glad they broke up when they did. You know, that's the best way I could put it. Any sooner, maybe not. It was just the right time. I think if they left it a little longer, it would be too late. It worked perfectly, and that's why the Beatles will always remain. I think even Yoko made a quote like that. They'll always remain a beautiful image or a beautiful dream because they ended before they deteriorated. Anyway, thanks for the question, Matt. It was fun to answer.